The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, thinking they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
I don't want to forget about this. I'm going to tell you this right now. I'll remind you again in the next hour. There is a DVR alert, especially if you're over the age of 50. On Sunday, before CBS launched into the 4.5-hour pregame show for the Super Bowl, they ran an NFL Films documentary called You Are Looking Live, and it's about the start and the history of the first pregame show, which set the standard, hosted by Brent Musburger with Irv Cross and Phyllis George and Jimmy the Greek, and Jane Kennedy plays a role in this. In fact, she's in the documentary. It's really, really good. And Brent is in this now. And, of course, you see the tape of Brent back in the day in the 70s when he was hosting the show. He's still sharp as a tack. He's 83 years old, incredibly eloquent about all the drama that went on. And there was a lot of drama behind the scenes. And if you're interested and did not see it on Sunday, it's going to air again Friday at 6 o'clock on CBS Sports Network, and again on Sunday at 5 o'clock. So I would say that if you have any interest in that period of time and you remember fondly getting to the television set at 12:30, it was only a half hour, you know. The pregame show for the Super Bowl this year goes 4.5. Back in the 70s, you had a half an hour for Brent to say, "You are looking live." And you get some thoughts from Jimmy the Greek, and Phyllis George usually had a feature, and it was getting you ready for Sunday. And God, that show was so great, and the documentary that was done on it is in many ways even better. It was just so good, and I'll talk about it in the next hour. Meantime, we got, I guess this is breaking news. Well, it's an interesting news story. I guess, you know, this might be something that Ron Rivera would say is interesting but not important, but it's if it happened, wow, what a blockbuster it would be in the NBA. But ESPN is reporting that at the trade deadline last week that there were some serious conversations between the Warriors and the Lakers about LeBron James hooking up with Steph Curry and going to the Warriors. The Warriors really wanted this to happen, but as it turned out, LeBron wasn't interested. Now, LeBron doesn't have a no-trade clause in his contract. The only player who has that is Bradley Beal. Good job, Ted. Really decreased the value of Beal in a trade, but got that done a couple of years ago, called it a partnership, which obviously didn't work out. But if, in fact, the Lakers wanted to trade LeBron, they could do that. Now, Jeannie Buss, the owner of the team, told Jacob LeCobb of the Warriors that the Lakers had no desire to trade LeBron, but would need to seek out his state of mind before they gave him the final answer. And they talked to his agent, Rich Paul, and LeBron was not interested in leaving the Lakers, so he stayed around. Now, they also got a call, the Lakers did, from Philadelphia 76ers president Daryl Morey, called Rob Pelinka, the general manager, to see if they could maybe make a deal for LeBron. And Pelinka said, "No, we're not trading LeBron, but if you guys want to trade Joel Embiid, we'd be interested in that." No, they're not. Now, LeBron has a player option in the upcoming season, $51.4 million, and he's going to opt out of that because he can get more money. And whatever they pay him, yeah, it's worth it for the Lakers. It's worth it for the league. The wild card in this, to me, is Bronny. Bronny James is now playing at USC. I don't even know how he's doing. I don't think he's lighting it up. And, you know, he died on the court. It was amazing that he was saved by a defibrillator, and, you know, very similar to what happened with DeMar Hamlin. And fortunately, he's back playing basketball. But I don't know if he's going to be ready to go to the NBA next year. I don't know if that's going to be the wisest thing. But LeBron has been talking about becoming the first NBA player to play with his son. It's happened in baseball, but it has not happened in the NBA, and certainly not in football because careers are short. Although I guess Tom Brady theoretically could have pulled it off. But no, that is something that we keep an eye on, is what's going to happen with Bronny and LeBron. But from the looks of things, no matter what happens with the Lakers this year, it appears that he's going to stay, that he's not going to leave and go to another team. But, that could change. But what was laid out when Bronny was headed off to college was he was going to go to college for a year, and then LeBron was going to see which team drafted him, and then he'd sign up as a free agent. I don't know if that's going to happen, and it might be in the best interest of Bronny to play another year in college at least, maybe even more than that, and that reunion with Dad may or may not happen. The other interesting angle on this, I heard Tony mention this yesterday on PTI, that if the season ended today, the play-in game would be between the Warriors and the Lakers. That's just imagine San Francisco, not that they would play since they're in different conferences, but San Francisco and Kansas City playing in a wild card game. This is an even bigger extreme with the play in the 9th and 10th teams in the West playing off in a one game to get into the playoff mix. It's anyway. So LeBron's going to stay in Los Angeles, but there was actual discussion of him hooking up with Steph Curry with the Warriors. NFL Films has come out with its treatment of the Super Bowl. This aired last night on Inside the NFL. They haven't done the full, I guess, what do they do, an hour or half-hour highlight film? They do it every year. They've been doing this since the early 60s, that they put out a highlight film from every championship game and every Super Bowl, and there will be one coming out. I think they're still doing America's Game, where they do that 1 hour treatment where you have 3 players, coaches, talking about the season and how it all unfolded. But we did get the mic'd up stuff from Sunday. And this is the winning score with the play-by-play call of Mitch Holthus of the Chiefs mixed in. And I'll get to what I think is what most people think is the most juicy one, what was said between Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift after the game. You've seen the embrace. Now we got the audio from that. I'll get to that in a moment. But this was how they treated the winning play in Sunday's Super Bowl.
Hey, so got church right bunch, F, shuttle, Tom and Jerry right, yellow. Orange, 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 let's go!
13 seconds to go in the overtime.
Set. We're good, we're good!
A touchdown wins the game.
Set.
Right side touchdown! Kansas City! There is a back-to-back Super Bowl champion, and it is the Kansas City Chiefs.
That screaming's coming from the mic'd up Patrick Mahomes, who went over to the sidelines and basically collapsed, just fell on his back in joy. He also, when things calmed down a little bit, he wanted to get involved with the others. It would seem like they were all going to gather around him, but he sees a group hug going on. Andy Reid's involved, and he wants in. So this is more of Mahomes after the game.
Can I get in on this? Can I get in on this? I love y'all. How crazy is that, huh? How crazy is that, huh?
I'm proud of you.
Yes, sir. What a call, huh? What a call. Oh, my gosh.
Call was Tom and Jerry, right? It had been cornhole or corn dog from the previous year. They were able to get a score on that, but this was the winning touchdown, and it was called Tom and Jerry for whatever reason. Now, the embrace between Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. I mean, shouldn't it be private between lovers? Well, I guess one or both gave approval of this, because we don't have the audio of the sideline bump between Kelce and Andy Reid. We saw it, and there's now still pictures, which are memes of Kelce screaming at Andy Reid, who's got his eyes closed. Reid, blew it off as kind of a love tap, and I think most people say it's just heat of the moment, competition. Don't read anything into it. Kelce says he owes his whole career to Andy Reid, so he's not mad at Andy Reid. But that audio has not come out yet, and maybe won't, because Kelce said after the game, you'll never know it unless it comes out on mic'd up. But I believe he has approval on that. And I guess he has not given approval, or maybe they're holding that for some other date. But they did release the audio of him with Taylor Swift after the game, and this is how it sounded.
Thank you for coming, baby.
I can't believe that.
Thank you.
I can't believe you.
Thank you for the support.
How did you
Thank you
do
for
that?
coming.
Thank you for making it halfway across the world. You're the best, baby.
Oh my God.
The absolute best. Was it electric?
It was unbelievable.
Oh my. The famous Gay Talese story about Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe, where DiMaggio is retired when he married Marilyn Monroe, but she went to Korea to entertain the troops, and she came back and she said, "Oh, Joe, it was unbelievable. Thousands and thousands of people cheering for me. You can't imagine that." And DiMaggio said, "Yes, I can." Yes, I can. All right, now here's the historical tie-in on this. The Chiefs really started all of this. Hank Stram was not the first coach to be mic'd up during a game, but he was the first coach to be mic'd up during a Super Bowl. This was Super Bowl IV, which took place in January of 1970. So we're going back 54 years. And he had agreed to be mic'd up during a regular season game. He had done that in the past, and NFL Films knew that he was gold. This was Steve Sable, who one of the great thrills of my life was getting to know him a little bit. There's a few people I admire in this business more than the late, great Steve Sable, and his dad, Ed Sable, started NFL Films. It was a relatively new company in 1970. They started in 1962, and they had the idea that they would make Hank Stram the first coach to be mic'd up for a Super Bowl. In the previous three, Lombardi wouldn't do it. I don't even know if they bothered to ask. Stram had been in Super Bowl I with the Chiefs, which they lost, and then Oakland was again Lombardi in Super Bowl II, and then Weeb Eubank didn't do it with the Jets, and Don Shula, I'm sure, wouldn't have done it with the Colts. But they approach Hank Stram for four, and they say, "We want to mic you up." And Stram says to them, he says, "Well, what about the coin of the realm?" And they went, "What?" "Yeah." And he rubbed his fingers together. So they settled on a price of $1,000. Hank Stram was mic'd up in Super Bowl IV for $1,000. And what they got was audio gold, which to this day is really the sideline standard for mic'd up coaches. And here is part of a documentary about that and why Hank Stram's things that he said on the sideline helped to make that Super Bowl so iconic.
Hank Stram was the very first person, player or coach, who was ever wired in a Super Bowl.
Let's go, boys. Hey, let's go, man.
NFL Films at this point was shooting all the games for both leagues as part of the merger agreement. And we had actually wired Hank Stram in a regular season game at Municipal. It was the Chiefs versus the Boston Patriots.
What are you doing in the huddle, Leonard? My God, what are you doing in that huddle all that time? He better tuck that ball away. Put that ball away. Out. He's out. 1 foot was out. We're just missing it that much every time. Every single time. We're that close. Look at this cleat mark right here. Look at the cleat mark right there. 1 foot was out and the other one was off. Well, geez, tell them to shut their big mouth and call them.
And it was one of the most hilarious and entertaining wires we'd ever had.
Was that there, Reds? Hey, was that there? Yes, sir.
I think that Ed Sable and Steve Sable, who had asked Hank to wear the wire, they thought that they had a potential gold mine there, and this just confirmed it.
Nice going there, Ridley. Mr. Official, let me ask you something. Okay, Coach, go ahead. How can 6 of you miss a play like that, huh?
Hank seemed somewhat more animated during the game.
I wondered why he was being so joyous and chattering all of the time down there.
I thought you had been on the field. No. What? Yeah, Sulky was running around there like it was a
He's engaging in that constant staccato banter
Lenny!
Through the whole game.
It looks like he's like a football coach from Hollywood Central Casting who's just reading off lines that he's memorized from a screenwriter.
Hey, move it up a little bit. Pop it out of that end zone, yeah. That's an excellent call. Those officials are doing a hell of a job. Just keep matriculating the ball down the field, boys.
As their outspoken head coach patrolled the sidelines of the '69 Super Bowl, the Chiefs' play on the field began to make even more noise.
They can't cover that in a million years.
The offense seemingly moved at will throughout the first half, and the Chiefs quickly jumped out to a 9-0 lead.
We put things together to kill these guys.
Look for 65 toss power trap. What does it look like? Hey, look for... Tell them 65 toss power trap. That might pop wide open, Rats.
They just felt that this is going to be a pushover. They forgot to tell us.
Running play coming to Garrett on a trap. Touchdown! Garrett scores for the Pags.
Was that there, Rats? Nice going, baby.
With 5:34 remaining here before the half, Garrett took it in.
16-0 lead. With the defense that we had against the Minnesota Vikings offense, there was no doubt in our mind.
Dawson post sideline pattern. Taylor home. 20, 25.
That's it, boys. That's it, Reds. That's it, boys.
And here he was in his moment in the sun.
They didn't know where Mike was.
On a national stage.
Didn't know where he was.
In the final game of the AFL's history.
Coach pumped it in there, boys.
Completely out-coaching the Lombardi disciple on the other side of the field. And you could tell he was enjoying that.
I told you that baby was there. Yes, sir, boys. Woo!
So 54 years after 65 toss-powered trap, pump it in there, Lenny, we get the same team, same organization, but it has evolved to the point where we now have a lover's embrace.
Thank you for coming, baby.
I can't believe that.
Thank you.
I can't believe you.
Thank you for the support. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making it halfway across the world. You're the best, baby.
Oh my God.
The absolute best. Was it electric?
It was unbelievable.
Amazing. So there you go. Hank Stram, I don't know. Yeah, he's in the great beyond now. You wonder how he would react. He'd probably think it was cool that from being mic'd up in Super Bowl IV, we've gotten to the point now where that happens as well. That's great. All right, coming up, and in the next hour, I'll get to the great special that was done prior to the Super Bowl about the making of the NFL Today. But Ross Tucker was on yesterday with Dan Patrick, and I thought this was a very, very concise and well-put-together conversation about the second-guessing of Kyle Shanahan for taking the ball in overtime. His logic is if it goes to a third possession, it becomes sudden death and they have the advantage. But there's some flaws in that logic, and Shanahan yesterday defended himself. So we'll get to what he said about it as well. Stay with us. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
So after a record-setting Super Bowl with over 123 million viewers, peaking at 129 million for the halftime show for Usher, there are a lot of people out there who are second-guessing what Kyle Shanahan did in the overtime when San Francisco won the flip and did not defer. Now, in the old days of overtime, especially when it was the team that won the flip, it was a no-brainer. You always took it possession. Now the rules for the playoffs have changed so that even if the team that gets the first possession scores a touchdown, the other team still gets the ball. And it would seem that this would work kind of like it does in college, although the college rules are different, and I think they stink where they start at the 25-yard line. I hate that. NFL is at least better, but this is, I think, going too far. But whatever, that's the rules. That's you got to know these rules going into overtime, and they elected to receive the ball, which Shanahan said after the game was the plan all along. They knew that going into the game, that if it got to that, they would do it because if both teams scored, let's say each team scored a field goal or each team scored a touchdown, they would get the third possession, and then it's a sudden death situation, and all you have to do is kick a field goal to win the game. You can buy that logic if you like. Now, Patrick Mahomes said, hey, if San Francisco had scored a touchdown there and we got the ball, we were going to score a touchdown and go for two. We weren't going to that third possession there. That wasn't going to happen. So you can look at it from both sides and say, yeah, it was really stupid what they did, or you can understand what Shanahan was thinking, and if it would have worked out, if they would have gotten the third possession, you might say, well, it was really smart what he did. But it is what it is, and now you second guess. And this was Ross Tucker, who did some of the pregame stuff on the radio. Another interesting thing that by the way, Tucker told Dan Patrick yesterday, I wasn't aware of this, that he had gone back to New York before the Super Bowl, and he was on the set at CBS headquarters just in case there was a problem with power going out, not on the field like it did, in the Super Bowl between the Ravens and the 49ers 11 years ago, where the whole game had to stop. But let's just say there was a power problem in the booth, and Jim Nantz and Tony Romo couldn't do it. then it would go back to New York, and they would do the game from the studio. I didn't know that. That was a backup plan, so that was cool. But Tucker, who's really good on football, he played in the league for about 6 or 7 years with several teams, including the Redskins for a couple of years. He went to Princeton, smart guy, and this was his take on what the 49ers did. And, as a former player and someone who analyzes the game, he really didn't have a problem with it.
In week 3, if you ask an NFL player who they play in week 5, most of them wouldn't be able to tell you. They honest to God, they would not be able to tell you. And then I've been thinking about this in terms of the overtime rules, right? Does it really matter how much the players knew the intricacies of the rule? In other words, very important that Kyle Shanahan knows what's going on, and he did. He wanted to have the third possession for a reason. The players are basically like the pawns or the pieces on the chessboard, right? Kyle Shanahan is the chess master. He's the one that needs to know. The players are very tunnel focused and need to execute their assignment. I understand why it's a big deal. Ultimately, I think it's being overblown. I don't think it really matters that much.
Why does Chris Jones, the defensive lineman for the Chiefs, know about this? They strategized for 2 weeks. They talked about it, that they hoped the opponent got the ball, they would get it back, and then they were going for 2. So this is a defensive player who's aware of what the philosophy is for the Kansas City Chiefs in case of overtime.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's awesome that the Chiefs knew what they wanted to do in that situation. By the way, I know there's a lot of debate going on, Dan, whether you should take the ball first or kick. I've talked to a lot of smart people about this. It's very complicated. You can make a strong argument either way. Obviously, if you go second, you have the information advantage. If you go first, you have the third possession advantage. The only thing I feel really strongly about is if you do go second, if you do kick, you got to go for 2. Like if you match the touchdown there, you got to go for 2. So kudos to Andy Reid and the analytics folks of the Chiefs for knowing that, for feeling like that was their best option, and for relaying that to the players. I think that's a major positive, that the players knew ahead of time, hey, if we get in this situation and we score a touchdown, we're going to go for 2. Ultimately, though, it was immaterial. I mean, the Niners kicked the field goal. The Chiefs scored a touchdown, and the game was over. I don't think it really impacted or affected the game. I think it's just something that we can attach ourselves to after the game and say it's brilliant by the Chiefs and a bad look for the Niners.
Okay, there's one thing that you're forgetting, and Mahomes brought this up. If I get the ball second, let's say the Niners score a touchdown. I get the ball second. I now get the benefit of 4 downs. Every possession, every situation is 4 downs. We get a first down, then I got 4 more downs, where the Niners had 3 downs, and then they were going to have to kick a field goal. That's a huge benefit for Patrick Mahomes to have 4 downs to get 10 yards to continue to try to score a touchdown.
Yep, I agree. And that's what I call the information advantage, right? You know what you need. You know if you have to go for it on 4th down. Totally agree on that part of it. I guess what I would argue is the Chiefs only scored 1 touchdown the whole game. I mean, they only scored 1 touchdown the entire regulation. So for Kyle Shanahan to say, hey, if neither one of us scores, then we get the ball with sudden death. If we both get a field goal, then we get the ball in sudden death. Again, I think it's really, really close either way. Obviously, it worked out beautifully for the Chiefs. And normally I would say, especially going against the Chiefs and Mahomes, man, maybe you should go second and maybe you should try to match the touchdown and then go for 2. But in fairness, they kept bogging down in the red zone. I mean, they only had 1 touchdown the whole regulation. And even on that last drive, they didn't need the touch. I mean, obviously they got it and they went for on 4th down once and got it, but they didn't even need the touchdown. So I don't know that they would have gone for it on 4th down near the goal line at that situation. Probably, but maybe not.
All right, so that's a balanced conversation. They both make very good points there. Yesterday, Kyle Shanahan held his final news conference of the season and was defending what he did. I don't think he would say, oh, yeah, I really screwed up, should have known the rules better, et cetera. No, he said we were prepared for that. They had laid out a plan with the staff before the playoffs began, not just the Super Bowl, because these rules were in effect for the entire postseason, but he laid this out with his staff, instructed his assistant coaches to let the team know before the overtime period started, but did not feel the need to discuss the plan with his team before that point. Now, we do know that the Chiefs laid this out in the preseason and going into the playoffs. And you even heard Patrick Mahomes say, you know what, why were you listening to all this? And then once it happened, they were prepared. So you could make the case Chiefs were better prepared, but does it really matter? That we'll get to that in a second. But this is what Shanahan said. He said, we told everyone as we were waiting for the coin toss to review everyone to make sure that they're sure before we go out. So we asked position coaches to do that, but I didn't cover it in a meeting during Super Bowl week. I don't think that changes anything. And Brock Purdy, quarterback of the 49ers, said he knew the rules. They were explained. I had an understanding. I think the quarterback is the most important one to have the understanding of the rules, says he had it. Also, John Lynch, the general manager of the 49ers, said, look, our defense had just been on the field with Kansas City in that final drive to set up the overtime. They went 64 yards on 11 plays, wanted to give them a little bit of a rest. So there was that. And then Kyle Juszczyk, the Pro Bowl fullback for the 49ers with locker clean out yesterday, got angry about it. He said to Michael Silver, the San Francisco Chronicle, why does it effing matter? That changes nothing for me as a player whatsoever. If I know the rule or don't know the rule, I'm trying to do the exact same thing on the field. It's just people looking for a way to S on Shanahan. And, you know, there could be something to that. I would say that more knowledge is better than less knowledge. And I don't, look, it's possible that if the 49ers score a touchdown there, and even Romo was confused by this, Romo with, another really weak performance, I thought, in his final game of the season. But do the 49ers celebrate when they score a touchdown there, thinking the game's over? Do they do that? No. Also you had a kicker who had already missed an extra point in the game. They'd have to get themselves back together. Not everybody would know, right? And you got to get the kicking unit out on the field. And you got to make that extra point. Otherwise, the Chiefs can come back and score a touchdown and win the game with an extra point. So there's a lot in play. It's always better to be prepared. I think that's the biggest takeaway here. And if you want to criticize Kyle Shanahan for not preparing his players properly, you might have a case on that. But I tend to side more with what the players are saying, and an ex-player in Ross Tucker and a current player in Kyle Juszczyk. As for this narrative now, and this was around Andy Reid, don't forget this. Andy Reid went through this in Philadelphia, where he made it to the NFC Championship game 3 straight years and lost the last time at home to Tampa before they finally won that and then lost the Super Bowl. So this Andy Reid can't win the big one story enveloped him, and then he went to Kansas City and changed all that. So Shanahan was asked about this perception that he can't win the big one, and he said, if I fix the perception, that means I did everything I wanted to do, which isn't fixed perception, it's winning a damn Super Bowl. We've won a lot of big games here. We've won a lot of big games to get into the playoffs. Those 2 Super Bowls have been tough, losing to Kansas City, but to think that if we win that means I can win a big game, no, it means our team won a Super Bowl. That's what I understand. You guys can have any narrative you want, but the success or the failure comes down to one game. And I hope that I can be a part of the team that wins a game at the end of the year. But to say that the Niners can't win the big game would be an extremely inaccurate statement. And I would prefer to have a coach who has the opportunity not to win the big game every year. I want a coach who gets you there all the time. Is it better to have Andy Reid and the best quarterback in the game and now arguably the best quarterback who ever played? That's a better situation. But you can't, as Jim Valvano said going into the championship game against Houston in 1983, the NCAA championship game, and they were big underdogs in that, and he played that up. He said, you know what? He said, you can't win it if you're not in it. He says, Kansas is not here. Duke is not here. Kentucky's not here. We're here. And we got a chance to beat Phi Slamma Jamma. Not much of a chance, maybe, but a chance, and you got to be playing to do it. So I'm not going to criticize Kyle Shanahan for not being able to win the big one, especially after what you've seen with Andy Reid. You know, some coaches get in, they win right away. Joe Gibbs won his first Super Bowl, lost his second, but then won 2 more. Bill Belichick, he won 2 Super Bowls as the defensive coordinator with the Giants, and then got in with the Patriots, and they won 3 out of 4. You know, so he was off and running, and there was a period of time where you didn't think it was possible that they would lose a Super Bowl, but they lost 3. They got in 10 times. I'd like to be in 10 times. I'd like to be the 49ers going to 2 Super Bowls in 5 years. That would be pretty damn good after a team here that almost never makes the playoffs. Hopefully that's going to change with the new regime, but I don't think you need to jump all over Kyle Shanahan and say he can't win the big one. Draft stuff. What's going to happen? Is Washington going to do what it takes to move up to number 1 to take Caleb Williams? Will Chicago trade Justin Fields and draft Caleb Williams? All kinds of things in play, and we got plenty of time to yak about it. Here it is, mid-February, so we still have over 2 months of this before we get to the NFL draft. So this is going to consume us, other than a little bit on pitchers and catchers, and I'll get to that in a couple minutes here. But that's going to be our focus here. What's going to happen in the draft, and what are the Bears going to do at number 1? Adam Schefter yesterday on our morning show here presented with the question about, might Chicago just hang on to Justin Fields and draft Caleb Williams?
I don't think it goes that way in the end, but I will just say that the organization definitely has discussed that. Now, could they come back to that in the end? Sure. Do I think that's the likely scenario? No. But they have given thought to the idea, hey, let's just draft the guy at 1, have Justin Fields here, and then they can work it from there. Now, by the way, they would hardly be the first team that's ever done that. We were talking about this on Sunday Countdown this past week. The Cowboys, when they had Troy Aikman, also had Steve Walsh. They were 2 first-round quarterbacks. And eventually they saw that Aikman had the talent that they needed and wanted and moved on from Walsh. And I don't remember what they got back for him. But quarterbacks in this league are currency. And if you have one, all of a sudden where one team loses a guy, like think back to the year, again, random quarterback moves pop into my mind. Right before the deadline, the Raiders had Jason Campbell. He went down. They had a winning record at the time. And right at the trade deadline, they traded at least a 1, maybe more to Cincinnati for Carson Palmer. So if you don't have the offer that you want at a certain time for Justin Fields, that doesn't mean in August when Sam Bradford or Teddy Bridgewater goes down with an injury, as happened in Minnesota, and a team is scrambling for a quarterback, that they're not going to go pay a premium for Justin Fields. It's not a traditional way of thinking about it. It's not the likely way it's going to unfold, but that's certainly a scenario that they have discussed, and I would imagine might discuss again here in the coming weeks.
Now, there's problems with that. One is probably Justin Fields gets his nose out of joint, because you're not spending the number 1 overall pick to keep him around as a backup. He's going to be your starter. It's just a question of when. So you got an unhappy guy who's been there for 3 years. So I don't know if you can handle that. The other part of this is, the comparison that he's making with what happened with the Cowboys in 1989 when they took Troy Aikman number one, and they took Steve Walsh number 1 in the supplemental draft. They were in the same draft, just that it was the supplemental for Walsh, and that was probably a security move on the part of Jimmy Johnson, that he looked around and he said, I need my quarterback, because Steve Walsh had led the University of Miami to a national championship when Jimmy was the coach. And so he wanted him there. I think he knew that Troy Aikman was going to be the guy. He had pursued Troy twice, tried to get him at Oklahoma State before he went to the University of Oklahoma. And when he transferred from Oklahoma, Jimmy tried to get him to go to Miami. He wanted him there, and he went to UCLA. But bringing in Steve Walsh, I think, was just something, a security thing for him, and realized they're both rookies. This is a different scenario. This is Justin Fields. It's been his team for 3 years, And now you're bringing in the guy who everybody knows is going to be the quarterback, and Fields is in the last year of his contract. I think, and players react differently now because of free agency and because of what we've seen in other sports like the NBA. If you don't like where you are, you get yourself traded someplace else if you're of a certain stature. So it to me, from a business standpoint and from if you're a head coach, you want that situation. You go, hey, Justin, if you think you're better, beat him out. And if you start ahead of Caleb Williams at the end of the year, we got a real decision to make. Do we trade Caleb Williams or do we trade you? I mean, there are all kinds of things that could happen here. Now, I think there's a better comp, and this is Drew Brees when he was playing for the Chargers. And Drew Brees wasn't Drew Brees right away. He was not a first-round pick. He was taken right at the top of the second round by the Chargers. They took LaDainian Tomlinson, number 2, and then they took Brees in the second round, and he struggled his first 2 years, or 3 years maybe. It might have been, 3 years. And so when it came time for the 2004 draft, remember they took Eli Manning, and Archie Manning said, no, we're not having him play in San Diego. So that's when they engineered the trade with the Giants, and they got Phillip Rivers. Well, Phillip Rivers was what? 5, 6. He was one of the top quarterbacks taken, and you had Brees there who was, in question because they obviously took a quarterback not knowing. As it turned out, Rivers held out. Brees really developed in that year, had a great year, and had he not hurt his shoulder in the last game of the year, they would have had a decision to make. But the shoulder injury was so severe, they weren't sure whether he was going to play again. Winds up going to New Orleans as a free agent, wins the Super Bowl there, and Phillip Rivers, although he may have had a Hall of Fame career with the Chargers, never won a Super Bowl. So this might be more comparable to that. It might be that you had Drew Brees with question marks in San Diego. You may have question marks with Fields in Chicago. And that might be a different kind of comp, just something to keep in mind. I don't think that the Walsh and Aikman thing works as well. All right, coming up, the Commanders are using Joe Gibbs to sell tickets. Now, that might seem like a no-brainer, but if he was as close as he was with Dan Snyder, as he said he was, why didn't that happen before? I'll play what they're using as part of their marketing campaign and have thoughts on that as well. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
We got Tony coming up on this Valentine's Day, coming up at 11 o'clock. Also, Valentine's Day story. I did not see the Netflix series Full Swing. I'm told that you don't really have to be a golfer to like it, but as part of this, they did stories about the relationship between Tony Finau and his wife, Elena. They are very, very close. I think it's Elena, Alayna. And little TikTok fun last couple of days. She says that her husband did not ask her to be his Valentine, and she's not happy about it. So she, on her TikTok post, showed a picture of the happy couple from their wedding day and wrote, "It's February 12th, and he hasn't asked me to be his Valentine yet." And then she put a picture of his golf bag, and it said, "Golf clubs for sale, 99 cents, hits far, thick grips, custom leather, head covers, Foresight launch monitor included." And Finau responded, "For like 99 cents? Can you believe it?" So, this went out, and he said, "I'm not on TikTok, but yesterday one of the equipment reps said to me, 'Your wife is so funny. I can't believe she's selling your clubs for 99 cents. I just went along with it and smiled, but in my head I'm thinking, I don't really know what he's talking about. Then I went on Instagram and saw a post about it and had a good laugh. It's too funny." Tony said he would cook up something to celebrate Valentine's Day tonight with his wife. It's like that old joke that a guy sees an ad he used to have classified ads in the paper, and he sees an ad in the paper for a 3-year-old Cadillac for $50, and he goes out to see the car, and it looks great, and he says to the woman who's selling it, "Why are you selling it for only $50? She said, "Well, my husband had it in his will that I was supposed to sell the car and give the money to his secretary." So maybe it's sort of a play on that. This is up on the Commanders' website, And I was kind of surprised. Well, maybe I shouldn't be surprised to see it because there is now a relationship, even a financial relationship, though not with the team, with other businesses that Josh Harris owns and with Joe Gibbs. But, if you're going to bring back the good feel of the days long gone, the days of the 80s, you want John Riggins back in the fold, which they've been able to do. Riggins has made appearances for them. Joe Theismann has done it. Darrell Green has done it. And most important of all is Joe Gibbs. And so this is an ad for season tickets about Joe Gibbs with audio past and present from Joe Gibbs and testimony from his players, which is designed to get you thinking about how good things used to be with this franchise and maybe how good they could be again.
Let's hit it now. Let's go. Everybody get this thing. Let's go. Get it over with. Let's earn it today. Now let's earn it.
No one was going to outwork Joe Gibbs.
There's none better that I've ever seen in my life.
We wanted to win for him. We wanted to win for him.
Proud of all of you. Proud of all of you, man.
I really feel like that organization is the #1 sports franchise in the world. And so I took all that and the reality hit me. I can't let them down. And so I think a lot of that is what drove me.
And I want you to know that each one of you has a small piece of this trophy today. This is the greatest sports franchise in the world.
Gibbs did a lot of that. Not that he really had to, because RFK was electric when the team was winning. But he would always reach out to the fans. Hey, we got to have our 12th man there. We got to have our fans yelling. And he made everybody feel a part of it. And, boy, if Snyder needed something in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years of the team, it was that. Gibbs, last coached in, 2007? The January of 2007 or January of 2008 is when he left the team after they had made the playoffs in his last year and lost at Seattle. And so we're going back 16 years. So it's been over a decade. And he used to talk about his friendship with Dan Snyder and how Snyder would call him from time to time. That was something that they needed to make when Snyder owned the team. Now, maybe Gibbs at some point had broken off with him because he did make some appearances, but you never saw him standing with Gibbs. He did it for the Hogs, when they honored the Hogs and things like that. But, obviously they've gotten him back into the fold, and they should have, and things are different now. So I thought that was interesting that they've done something that was important to do, but you would think that was the last lifeline that Snyder had, and he couldn't use it. I don't know this. I'm just speculating. Just seems to me, after all the great things that Gibbs used to say about Snyder, even after he left the team, that at some point that changed. And maybe it was the Washington Post reporting. I don't know what it was, but things changed in that regard. This was a story from, what was it, Sunday, right? Yeah, Sunday. The Rooney Rule seems to finally be working. We had 8 openings for coaches this year in the NFL, and 4 of them were filled by African Americans. And next season, of the 32 teams, 9 will be headed up by minority head coaches. But there is now a pushback on the Rooney Rule. A conservative legal nonprofit has filed a federal civil rights complaint against the NFL, alleging that the Rooney Rule is illegal. And this is a former Donald Trump advisor, Stephen Miller, who was with them. He says if the National Football League truly wants to end discrimination in the employment process, then the NFL should stop discriminating in the employment process, follow the system, and it displays on the field, and eliminate the Rooney Rule. And then they point out in the story, hundreds of companies have opted for some form of the Rooney Rule since 2003, when the league began compelling teams to interview minority candidates for any head coaching position. Many Fortune 500 companies go further, with some requiring as many as 3/4 of the job contenders come from underrepresented groups or offering incentives to select them. Some legal scholars and conservative activists say the hiring practice, referred to in the private sector as diverse candidate slates, could be illegally could be legally vulnerable, especially since the Supreme Court upended race-conscious college admissions in June, sparking a wave of legal challenges against corporate DEI initiatives. So that could have the ripple effect, what you heard. Remember, the college admission process has changed. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission complaint filed Tuesday contends that the Rooney Rule violates Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act and that the agency should investigate. Quote, it's abundantly clear that the NFL and its member teams do indeed limit, segregate, or classify their employees or applicants for employment in ways that deprive at least some individuals of interview and employment opportunities, specifically because of race, color, or sex, the letter says. D'Amico Ryans has really blown this whole thing out of the water anyway. The success that he has was and I think that had an effect this year. Not only is he African American, but he's a defensive guy, and defensive guys are usually a second choice. You know, Dan Quinn was not the Commander's first choice. He's a defensive guy, and it may work out well. But it's offensive, the young offensive guys is what everybody wants. Now, they point out here in the story, the NFL's use of the Rooney Rule has produced some misses in diversifying NFL's head coaching ranks. A 2022 Washington Post investigation found the number of black head coaches leading the 32 teams has never surpassed 10 in a single season. In 2024, there will be 9 minority head coaches, including 6 black coaches. The NFL has enhanced the rules in recent years. When it established in 2003, it required only 1 minority coach be interviewed for any head coaching position. Now it requires 2. The rule has also been extended to general manager and offensive coordinator positions. In 2020, following corporate America's lead, the NFL began offering incentives. If a team loses a minority executive or coach to another team, that team receives a third-round pick. In compensation for 2 years, if a team loses both a coach and personnel member, it receives a third-round compensatory pick for 3 years. So we'll see where this goes. I hope that it doesn't go through, but boy, after all the work that has been done on this and all the setbacks they've had, this is not something that needs to go away, because it does finally seem to be working. It did not work for a long time, and maybe we're going to have another cycle where it won't work. But I don't think you want to take away any of this right now. I don't think that's the move that anybody wants to see for what has been a real tough climb for the NFL on this particular issue. All right, coming up, I will talk about what I enjoyed so much yesterday, the NFL Films documentary on the making of the NFL Today with Brent Musburger. It is well worth your time, especially if you're older and you remember those days, because the backstories are tremendous. We'll get to that next. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Once upon a time, believe it or not, there was no ESPN, there was no NFL Network, there was no Fox Sports. We didn't have all that. And when Sunday came around, you had AFC games, and before that, AFL games on NBC. And CBS, back from the early 60s, was the network of the NFL and NFC. And we'd start the games at 1 o'clock. And, in fact, in Baltimore, you couldn't start a game until 2 o'clock because they had blue laws there. So the home games for the Colts would start at 2 o'clock. It wasn't until later on where the blue laws changed and they were able to line things up. So the certain number of teams started at 1 and certain numbers started at 4 o'clock. So you turn on the game when it started. Mid-'70s, something comes along called the NFL Today. Now, there had been pregame shows before on both NBC and CBS, but they were taped. They were taped during the week. And in 1975, they came up with the idea of doing a live pregame show. It's only a half an hour. Now we have pregame shows like ESPN's starts at, I think, 10 o'clock now for 1 o'clock games, and there may even be a pregame show there, and NFL Network has one that starts at 9 a.m. I mean, it's just nothing but nonstop yak. And the Super Bowl now, nobody even blinks, where you have a 4.5-hour pregame show, and this one included this, what I'm going to talk about here, this great documentary of NFL Films about how the NFL Today got underway. Now, Brent Musburger is 83 years old. He's still very, very sharp. He has his own network now. It's the Gambling Network, VISN, which he runs out of Las Vegas, where he lives. He was always out in front on gambling, always hint, hint, wink, nod when you weren't supposed to say anything about it. But he knew where the interest was. He knew how many people were following the NFL because of gambling. And he was way out on that. He's curiously not in the Hall of Fame. Dan Patrick went on a crusade for him last week at the Super Bowl and should have. I don't know why he's not in the Hall of Fame, but I'll bet he'll get in. But he was so important to the development and the popularity of the sport. You got to remember, 1975, baseball was the sport. Baseball did better than football. And I got to believe that the NFL today had a lot to do with the popularity, particularly with the addition of Jimmy the Greek for the gambling, and also Phyllis George, who brought another element to the broadcast, not just for men, although men like looking at her and looking at her work, of course, former Miss America, but also women, and brought the women's perspective. And maybe the most famous interview she ever did was with Roger Staubach at a time when Joe Namath was celebrated as the great playboy, and Roger had a few kids and was the, he won the Super Bowl MVP, and instead of taking the Corvette, asked for a station wagon. And he said to her, hey, I like sex just as much as Joe Namath. I just like to do it with one girl, meaning his wife, and that's the element that she brought in. So it was groundbreaking at the time, and it paved the way for all the pregame stuff that we have now. This was Brent last week when he appeared on the Dan Patrick Show and talked about both the documentary, which he pretty much narrates, and how the NFL today got off the ground.
We had announcers who went to the games to do halftime and postgame, and I was one. And we got a call from the head of sports at CBS, Bob Wessler, and he said, Brent, Jack Whitaker and Pat Summerall tape a show on Friday, okay? He said, but I want to eliminate that and go live for the 30 minutes, okay? And he said, do you know Irv Cross? And I laughed, and I said, I know him very well because we were at Northwestern together, and I was a gopher, really, for the Daily Northwestern. The sports editor was upperclassman, and so I would have to go get quotes from Coach Eric Parsegan, who was there before he went to Notre Dame, and Irv, and I said, Irv is a delightful man. And I said, heck of an athlete. So it was going to be the two of us. And about 6 weeks later, I get a call from Mr. Wessler, and he said, Brent, do you know a Miss America by the name of Phyllis George? And I go, Bob, I'm sorry, but I really don't follow the Miss America pageant. I said, if you ask me who the quarterback is for the Colts, I might be able to tell you. And he said, I want to bring her in on the show. Now, I'm not going to say no, let's do it. And it was a great addition because Irv and I had rehearsed and practiced in halftime. We knew how to do the highlights and all that. But Phyllis was one of those special personalities, Dan. She lit up a room. Yeah. And at that time, there were no women sportscasters around, okay? There was a Jane Chastain was working at it down in Miami, and that was the only one I remember. But the folks, the men in particular, they welcomed Phyllis on a Sunday morning. And she wound up being just a great host. And then the next year, the summer, I get a call, Brent, do you know a gambler by the name of Jimmy the Greek? And I said, are you kidding? When I stopped by Las Vegas, of course I know the Greek. I want to put him on the show. And I hesitate there, and I said, what does the commissioner think? Oh, we're going to have a meeting with him. He's going to be fine. Now, the one thing I knew about Pete Rozelle, I'd always seen him at the Kentucky Derby. I knew he was a horse player. I'd seen him at Actors. So I said, well, he knows a little bit about gambling. So we had a delightful meeting. It was Wessler, the Greek, and Brent over in Park Avenue, the NFL office. It could not have been nicer. And we get up to leave, and he said, one thing, he said, I'd like to ask a favor. Now, when a commissioner tells the three of us a favor, it's an order coming down the line, okay? He said, I want you guys, when you do your show, please don't mention -3 +7. Now, okay, I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's the whole point of this exercise. So, but we all said, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And on the way back, we said, what are we going to do? And we brought in some of the technical people, and we rehearsed. And they managed to devise the checkboard for the Greek. People remember those early days, okay. And if the Greek checked about 4 on one side, you knew it was cover 7. That team's going to cover the deal. And then one day, about 3 years later, the Greek took ill and couldn't make the show. We found out on Saturday, and I said, well, listen, my friend Pete Rose is in town, and I knew he liked to gamble on anything that moved. So I called Pete, and I said, Pete, I know this is Brett. I said, listen, a favor, can you come over? And so he came over. And to this day, when I run into him, he said, you should have kept me. I was a better handicapper than the Greek. Okay, that was my guy, Pete Rose. Okay.
Yeah, that's covered in the documentary as well. You see Pete Rose on the set. Jimmy the Greek apparently rode a motorcycle and got hurt and had to miss a week, so they brought in Pete Rose. Now, think about this. Rose is still an active player at this point. I believe he was playing for the Phillies, and he's got the bowl haircut, the whole Pete Rose look. Gambling is what obviously cost him the Hall of Fame, but the larger point is, did baseball have anything to say about this? I mean, wasn't this, even though it was football, the golden rule is you can't bet on baseball. That's in every clubhouse, and that's what ultimately did him in. But if there was a commissioner who had interest at the time, I believe it was Bowie Kuhn, maybe he didn't even find out about it until it happened. Did Pete Rose, I'm sure he didn't, could he have checked and said, I'm going to go on the NFL today. We don't do point spreads or anything, but I'm gonna have some fun. I'm going to pick football games with my friend Brent Musburger. Given all that's happened since, wouldn't there be some blowback on that? Like, whoa, I don't think we want you to associate with gambling in any way, Pete, even if it's just football, so don't show up. But there you see it. You see Pete Rose in this documentary. Now, another thing that was really groundbreaking about this show, not just for the pregame, the half-an-hour pregame, which ran 12:30 to 1 o'clock, but the halftime where they could actually show you highlights of games. Prior to that, they would have phones in press boxes across the country, and there'd be somebody at a desk that took down scores. And by the way, this really went into like the 1980s when there was no internet. And I remember doing shows at WFAN on Sundays where we would go from game to game. We would have what we call stringers at every game, and they would update you on the scoring and how the scoring happened. Bobby Beathard, who had left the Redskins after the 1988 season, and 1989 and maybe even 1990 was working at NBC, said that they would listen to WFAN because that was the only way they could get information on what was happening in these games. There was no in-game stuff that you get on ESPN.com and places like that. So it was very primitive. They're getting scores over the phones, and that's how they're passing along. Now they're able to take highlights from the games that are going on, but the way to do it is very primitive. It's not anywhere near what it is now. Sometimes the tape rolls, sometimes it doesn't. But Brent, who is incredibly great on his feet, and able to do live television as well as anyone has ever done it, he just roll with the punches and keep on going. The You Are Looking Live, and that's the title of the documentary. That's how Brent would open every telecast. You know how that started? This is fascinating. Bob Fishman, who was a director on the show, said his dad used to like to bet the over-under on games. And when you're betting that way, it's always weather dependent. And they didn't have any way of knowing what the weather was in these other cities. So when they would go to the live shot of the game, and when they would go around the league and preview what games were going to be shown on CBS that day, Brent came up with You Are Looking Live as a hint to gamblers. Hey, it's a half an hour until kickoff. Here's what the weather is if you're looking to get your last-minute bet in with the bookie, that it's snowing in Minnesota, or it's raining in New York, or wherever the game happens to be, RFK, the whole thing. And that's why You Are Looking Live became the trademark phrase of Brent. He was tipping off the gamblers at that point. Now, you heard the story that Brent told about how Jimmy the Greek came in, then Pete Rose coming in, so forth and so on. The Phyllis George edition was very, very rocky. I mean, you would think that adding a woman to the telecast wouldn't cause as many problems as it did, but she only did it for 3 years initially, 75, 76, and 77. And then her star was rising, so she got her own show on CBS, which didn't last, but they gave her own show. She was replaced by Jane Kennedy, who was gorgeous. I had forgotten. They showed a tape how beautiful she was, African-American, and she now is must be in her 70s now, and she's part of this documentary as well. And she said she only got a 6-week tryout, but she knew Muhammad Ali. And Muhammad Ali had just I forget whether he had lost or won the heavyweight championship against Leon Spinks. He lost to him first, then beat him on the second time. Might have been after he beat him. And she arranged an exclusive interview with him, and so that curried favor with the CBS executives, and she got a contract. But she only lasted 2 years, and there was still a lot of prejudice at the time in television, and there was a feeling that you couldn't have her on the set because you had another African-American in Irv Cross, and the Southern affiliates didn't like that, seeing that many black faces on television. This is the 1970s. This isn't the 1950s. This is the 70s. And so the way they fixed it was that they had Jimmy the Greek, who had not been on the set. Like, he had his own separate desk. So now the two, with Irv Cross and Brent Musburger, and where you had Phyllis George as a part of it in the past, you can now bring Jane Kennedy in as long as you had Jimmy the Greek, who was white, balancing it out. That was fascinating to me, really fascinating. And then, as it's a nasty, nasty business, she got bumped when Phyllis was ready to come back. And she didn't really find out about it until the Super Bowl that year. She's doing a report from helicopter over the stadium, and she finds out her piece is getting bumped because they're doing something with Phyllis George. And, in fact, Phyllis George comes back in 1980. Now, Jimmy the Greek was the one that introduced Phyllis George to her husband, John Y. Brown, who later became owner of the Boston Celtics. He owned the Kentucky Colonels and the ABA, and he had one time owned Kentucky Fried Chicken. And Jimmy the Greek worked for him as a PR man. And when John Y. Brown sold Kentucky Fried Chicken, Jimmy the Greek felt he got screwed out of some money, that he should have gotten some of the sale, and that didn't happen. And he didn't dislike Phyllis, but he said on the set one day that he said, "Phyllis, I don't dislike you, but I despise your husband." And she was in tears. Anyway, this now leads to some real tension from the Greek. He's really upset that Phyllis is getting more airtime than he's getting, and he's mad at Brent for that. And Brent tells the story of him being at a bar. It was called Pear Tree, and he's there drinking with his brother, and Jimmy comes in, and he's had a few. And that leads to one of the most famous fights in television history, that there is an actual fist fight between Jimmy the Greek and Brent Musburger. And what you're going to hear here are the voices of the Greek, Brent, Phyllis George, Mike Francesa, who at the time was a producer on that show, and Mike Tirico. Here we go.
He says, "I'm going to put you on the wall and plaster you like a poster." And I said, "When are you going to do this?" And I hit him.
Jimmy punched Brent in the face, and it was a little bit of a scene.
My brother jumps across the table at him, and I'll never forget, the Greek had a beer bottle in his hand, and he smashed it against the bar, broke it open for a weapon. And the bartender is the smartest dude in the room. He turns all the lights off. Nobody could see anybody. So by the time they turned them back on, everybody had settled down. The only problem was there was a guy who was working on the city desk at the New York Post who was at the bar.
It was simmering for a while. He thought there were times where Brent was not being good to him. Greek grew up on the streets. He was not someone you could push around. So the fact that he would throw a right hook doesn't surprise anybody.
Van Gordon Sauter, the head of CBS Sports at the time, called up and he was going to fire the Greek. And I said, "Don't fire the Greek." I said, we'll somehow. We'll make this work. It's a couple of brothers had a spat.
I guess I'm always making headlines. But here's one you can forget. Neither Don King or Bob Arum will offer $10 million for a rematch between Brent and the Greek.
And what did that do? For me, at least, just made it even better. Like, okay, there's a little tension. We're fine.
Round two.
Ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you that Jimmy the Greek was right on target last Sunday. Now, Jimmy, let's see how you do this Sunday. We've got the Pittsburgh Steelers 4-4 against the Green Bay Packers.
And the reason that they're laughing as Brent pulls out his pointer to point to the game, he's got a boxing glove on his hand. So they made it into a joke, and they made it big. And everything was okay until we got to Martin Luther King's birthday in 1988, and that happened to be the weekend that the Redskins were hosting the Vikings in the NFC Championship game. So the whole crew was here, and they went out to Duke Zebert's for lunch on a Friday afternoon, and there was a reporter there from Channel 4 who was going around asking people at the restaurant about their feelings about Martin Luther King, and that's when the Greek unleashed all that nonsense about, how slaves were bred and so forth and so on, and they had to fire him, and it was Brent, who said for the only time in his career on a pregame show, he read off a prompter, a prepared statement from CBS as to why they had fired Jimmy the Greek for what he said. And there's a great part in this. Jim Nantz, who became sort of at that time was transitioning. I guess he was the young guy who came in the mid '80s. So at this point, he's moving up the chain. And he had done some work with Jimmy the Greek on another show, not the NFL Today. And he said he was on vacation somewhere, and he saw on a screen a picture of Jimmy the Greek. And he said, oh, my God, Jimmy the Greek must have died. So he called Mike Francesa, and he said, hey, Mike, I just saw something on TV. Did Jimmy die? And Francesa says, no, it's worse than that. And that was the end of it. A very sad story and a sad finish on that. And then, not too many years later, Brent decided that he wasn't going to be tied to the desk anymore, and he wanted to do other things, and he started doing everything for CBS. Got to be too much, and they acquired baseball in 1990. He wanted to do that too, and CBS executives said, no, it wasn't about money. It was about doing all those games, and they said, forget it, we're not going to renew your contract. And he got that news during the Final Four in 1990, did the championship game between Duke and UNLV, which was a blowout for UNLV, and said, I'll see you down the road. And then, shortly thereafter, resuscitated his career and went to ABC, had a great long run there, and is one of the legendary broadcasters of all time. But this show, I mean, they cover everything. It's 1 hour, and it is spectacular. So if you didn't get a chance to see it or you didn't tape it from Sunday, it's going to run again Friday at 6 o'clock on CBS Sports Network, and that'll run again at 5 o'clock on Sunday. So it's Friday at 6 and Sunday at 5 on CBS Sports Network. If you missed it, and if you did, I urge you to go watch it because I think it's terrific. That does it for me. Tony's coming up next. Happy Valentine's Day. I'll see you back here tomorrow at 9 a.m.